Welcome everybody. It's very nice to see you here for this discussion with Alice Maher at Drawing Now, and in partnership with CEA, the French Curator Association. My name is Estelle Marois. I'm an independent curator and writer, and so this talk will be taking place only in English, so you know. So let's introduce Alice. Alice Maher is one of Ireland's leading artists, and she's developed a multidisciplinary practice since the 1980s, with drawing playing a prominent role, among other mediums such as painting, sculpture, print, photography, installation. And her work focuses on the tensions between nature and culture, mythology and folklore, memory and the unconscious, as well as on the feminine, trapped between constraint and transformation. Over the years, she's forged a unique visual language imbued with tactility, including in her drawing practice. Alice works with Purdy Hicks Gallery in London, with whom she's currently presenting work at Drawing Now, as well as David Nolan in New York and Kevin Kavanagh in Dublin. And as of yesterday, she's the laureate of the 2025 Drawing Prize by the Daniel and Florence Gerlin Contemporary Art Foundation. So congratulations, Alice. So actually, here is some of the work that has been shown both at Drawing Now and also at for the Gerlin Prize. So that's very recent work by Alice. If you maybe hello.
Okay. Yes. So this is very, very recent work, and probably the first thing to tell you about it is the scale. Because scale is very important, especially when you see images reproduced. So these are quite large physical drawings, about 155 centimeters, if you do centimeters, by 105. So physical size. And that's very important to me, that I physically get involved in the drawing, you know, to kind of draw out something in my own body as well. And you can see they are figurative, there are figures there, but those figures, oh. Hello? Yeah, I don't use models, you know, or I don't use photographs, or I don't use looking out to see what what a figure looks like. I actually get into those positions personally. Like, is it working? Is this one on? Yes. On. So I kind of, I get into those positions personally myself, just to feel where the weight is distributing in my body, so that I can draw by feeling it rather than seeing it, if you know what I mean. So that's probably the center of my whole approach to my work, really, is that it does come from the inside, but it comes out to the world outside as well. But it's from a position of knowing what that feels like, rather than looking and illustrating what that might look like.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think it's introducing some of the things. Yeah, is it okay? Yeah. That we are going to discuss also through the conversation.
Yes.
So just to do a little rewind. So you studied at the University of Limerick and the Crawford College of Art in Cork, and then got an MA in Fine Art from the University of Ulster.
In Belfast, yes.
Yeah. And then a Fulbright scholarship to study at the San Francisco Art Institute.
Yes.
And
that's where I saw a lot of, I had a scholarship yet to go to San Francisco, and that was a really amazing eye-opener, you know, in a way to get away from Ireland, but also to encounter kind of Latinx work, you know, from Mexican artists and stuff on the West Coast. That was really amazing, you know, for me, and I used my scholarship. I didn't really attend the college. I actually went to Mexico with the money, and, you know, around I went to kind of see where the source of all that amazing work was. Yeah. So this is the kind of work that you just put up there that I probably was doing at that time. We're talking about 1986, okay? So maybe before some of you here were born. And at that time, and it's probably interesting to give you context of where I lived and the country that I lived in 1986. It was practically what you might call a theocracy, meaning it was run by church beliefs, and society was all very repressed and controlled by these beliefs. So the drawings that I was doing at the time, and it's probably true, Estelle, that I wasn't in a way aware of what I was saying. It was coming from the inside, you know what I mean, into the outer world. So here you have this kind of exploding figure, you know, pressing out from her, and you can see it's a female bride, pressing out all the things, the keys, the babies, the, you know, all the stuff of the world. And there's another little creature there waiting to catch it, you know. Anyway, and there's collage in it. I did a lot of tearing up at that time as well, and it was kind of emblematic of tearing up what you were given, you know, the situation that you're in, and then reconstructing it. So it was like structure, destruct, and then reconstruct, and then draw on top. So that was kind of the way I found the imagery. So I didn't start with a particular idea. I knew that it would be figurative, so I just start working with an idea, and it will change as time goes on. So I try to allow time to be a part of, a material part of the construction of the work also.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was actually quite curious about this work because we could see some recurring themes also that then you've been developing and now all sort of put together, and then I think the rest also of your practice has sort of you know, like taken all the threads that we can.
It's probably like people say you're saying the same thing all the time. You know what I mean? Just in different media, or you know, coming to kind of distill it perhaps a little bit more. Because obviously, when you're younger, you're just throwing everything out of the kitchen sink, everything, you know, and all your anger, your rage, the pressure, you know, the repression. And then as time goes on, you probably, you know, start to distill that into a more cogent person kind of language. So this drawing was found recently, you know, it's from that era, and somebody had donated it to a collection in Northern Ireland, and I discovered it because it was included in an exhibition called Collage, a Political Act, you know. So that's exactly what it was actually, but I didn't know that at the time.
It's quite interesting to look at it now from, you know, from the perspective of time, and so yes, so like there are a few also elements that then we'll see in the rest of the work, such as a mythological reference with the cornucopia, so the horn of abundance. Also, obviously, we have a reference to the female condition and motherhood.
There's a rosary bead.
There is a
rosary beads in there.
Yes, also. There is also even a start of hybridity, also, you know, of creatures, and also processes of erasure that are also things that you also developed. And we'll talk about that.
But all those methodologies that you're talking about kind of reflect the position of the female in society, you know, like the erasure, the, you know, over painting, you know, just the whole methodology even itself kind of somehow represents the situation that I was working in, you know, or that I was reflecting, shall we say. You
did this work when you were in LA, or was it just before? It was just before, okay. Yeah. So I think to move to a more recent piece, so the map, which is from 2021, and it's a work that you're still showing. So I wanted to talk about this work also because it shows that you also work with other mediums. This is a textile work.
Yes.
And so I'm just curious also, how does drawing play a part also in your approach to working with other medium? Okay. I don't know if that's something that you can talk to in relation to...
Absolutely. So this work is called The Map, and it's 6 meters by 4.42 meters. And it's entirely handmade by myself and my colleague that you see there. So it's a collaboration.
Rachel
Fallon. And every piece is made by hand. So we made that over a 3-year period. So it involves embroidery, sewing, embellishment, crochet, you know, many different methodologies. And the theme of the work, we'll talk about drawing in a minute, the theme of this work was around the life and legacy of Mary Magdalene. And it was part of a series of exhibitions around that theme. So my colleague and I decided we would map, you know, make a kind of alternative map of that legacy as it were. And so, of course, you probably know that the legacy of that name, very name, in my country was the repression, incarceration, you know, and enslavement of women and girls in Magdalen, what were called Magdalen laundries. If you transgressed the rule of either society or religion by becoming pregnant, you know, or even just transgressing by being wild, you know, or whatever. So we wanted to work on that. So we've created an alternative universe. There are alternative constellations. So not the constellations that we know in the sky, like the Great Bear and the Little Bear, but the Great Sinner and the Little Sinner. And so we have the Little Laundress. You know, we have our own continents and monsters, the monsters of poverty, repression, you know, racism that tried to drown people. But the drawing element of it, yes. How do you reach imagery for something like this big? So we just began, Rachel and I, by sending each other a drawing every day. And that's how we came up with like a dictionary or a lexicon of imagery to work with. You know, we didn't say, plan, 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 we'll do this. So I'm sending a drawing and it's crossing her drawing, she's sending a drawing to me. And because it's COVID, we can't actually meet each other. So there's something about that as well. So we're working in trust with each other to come up with images. And because I suppose the subject is so deep to our society, you know, in our culture, that we were as one, I suppose, you know what I mean, in creating it. And we never say, when we're showing the work, who did what. You know, I did this and you did that. So, you know, it has become a collaboration. And the next time this will show now, next week or something, is going to Budapest for the Biennale in Budapest. And like, we would consider that very relevant, that would go and show in a country that does repress the rights of women still and continuously as well, you know. So we would be very aware of where that particular work is shown and how that creates dialogue around the work when it goes to a country. It also showed in the United States very recently, you know, whereas also someplace which is actually moving towards the repression of people and difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, of course, the theme of the female condition is a recurring thread in your work, and so we have. So I think you engage a lot with the Christian legacy of figures such as Mary Magdalene. Yeah. You also include other representation of women, like through Western art history. So are there also other mythological
kind of figures like Cassandra or?
Yes.
Generally, Cassandra I was very attracted to because, of course, she's the prophet, like she's a prophet, or she could see the future, but of course she was cursed that nobody would believe her, which is often the position, you know, that you're in. When you tell your truth, then nobody believes you. So that's why I was very interested. I made a film, actually, a short film called Cassandra's Necklace, and that was about her loss of voice also, and she wears a necklace of tongues, you know, tongues around her neck. And that kind of represents the loss of voice. So, of course, in my culture, we've also lost our language in that we originally spoke Irish, Gaelic, but then that was forbidden, you know, on pain of death or imprisonment. So we lost that particular language, but then we rebranched that language into a form of language that's far more poetic and far more complex than regular English, well, we think. So
that
like
you use, is that a language that you can use also every day, or is that something
Irish?
that is used more like maybe in literature, or how is it?
No, it has survived in the very, very west of Ireland, you know, so like it's at the margins, and that's a kind of a place that I'm very happy to work in also, you know, in terms of who is at the margin. And I'd always be interested in things that are despised, you know, like snails, worms, you know, the things that we walk on without even noticing what we're doing, you know. So the language is the same thing, but that language is coming back with force, as a matter of fact, because this generation have kind of rediscovered the language, because it's a really, like, it's very different from the English language, and we have 1,000 different phrases for everything, you know, including how nature works, how rain works, you know, all that. And there's no word for no in Irish, you know, so it's a particularly positive positive use of language. Yeah.
So to just carry on also on the way you work with the notion of womanhood, I think your exploration of the female condition is very embodied, and it engaged directly with the physicality of the bodies, and it's evident in the tactile qualities of your work, which is something that we could think is also difficult to capture on work with works on paper. And I wanted to show some of the
early
series.
work, very early work, like it's very early work. I'm just
that's
saying.
It is early work, but that's also a series that I think you showed at Tate Liverpool. So I guess
did.
it was quite an important
It was
series.
the first time, I guess, that my work was shown outside of Ireland in the Tate Liverpool, and that was a wonderful opportunity. And it was an exhibition called Strongholds, and so it kind of fitted into that theme, because there were these kind of girls trying to find a space for themselves, you know, in the world. So you see them beating the ground or pulling up stalks, you know, staring at objects, and it's almost like they are in tension, you know, waiting for something to happen, making space for themselves. And it's kind of interesting that at that time these are adolescent, young girls, and as I got older, the figures kind of got older too, you know. Yeah, even though I wasn't a young girl at the time, but it was like the young girl of my work, in a way, you know. Yeah.
Yes.
And the thicket, of course, a thicket.
That's the notion that was.
A thicket is like a hedge of thorns.
Yes,
you know.
it's very bushy and.
It's bushy, and you can hide behind it, you know. You can hide in it, you know. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly where I wanted to go to. So the thicket is a landscape that is tangled, scrubby, impenetrable, dense. It can be both protective or threatening. We don't really know, comfortable or uncomfortable. And I was wondering how you see the connection between the body, particularly the female body, and the idea of thickets and everything that it evokes. It's very, you know, there is something very physical about that notion.
Yes.
Something that is both mysterious, something that we cannot really get in, but also dense and probably full of life. Or
it might be it might be interesting to know that I was born and raised on a very small farm, you know, in the middle of the country, you know, so I have a relationship with it that is not romantic. You know, so like for us it was work, you know, and you had to do things like stand in gaps, you know, and, you know, look after cattle and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So the relationship with nature is a little bit different from looking at it. Again, it's a bit like I was talking about how you experience your body. And for us, and in my childhood, we heard so many stories and folk tales from my mother in particular. And it seemed as if all the landscape was alive, you know, with stories, that every rock had a reason to be there and every well spoke to you, you know, as you passed it. So, you know, that the landscape was alive for us as children. It wasn't a dead thing that you walked on. It wasn't a beautiful thing that you looked at. You know, it was part of you and part of your ancestral memory. And that's something that I spoke about yesterday too, that try to access not just your own body, you know, the feeling of your own body, the internal and external, but the ancestral body. You know, it's like the body from generational memory, to try to access that and bring that out into your work. And you find that in the folk stories or in the tales, in the landscape. So that definitely gets into the work as well.
It also, what you're saying also relates to what you just said about Irish language and the way that it can have many phrases to describe something that maybe English would just have one word for, maybe a more multi-layered approach also.
That's right. And I mean, Irish writers have taken the English language and taken it somewhere else completely. If you think of all the writers of the 20th century, all the great writers were Irish, you know, like Joyce and Beckett, Oscar Wilde, Swift, like, you know, so they've used the language in a completely different way and taken it into, you know, another chamber.
I think from the idea of thicket and this idea of something that is impenetrable and also something that swallows you, maybe, I also wanted to talk about the notion of scale, which is, I think, something that is very important for you. Because also with this thicket, it can also evoke something that you know, we could be afraid to enter something, you know, mysterious and maybe threatening, as I said. And also the question of scale, which is maybe, so I'm showing that work, and also with the fact that there is also the like the sort of scale that we can see. You know, there is this idea of like feeling maybe reduced or miniaturized by those mysterious and dense thickets that we've seen. And so I wanted to talk about the notion of scale and how it also mediates the relationship between the viewer and the artwork, and how you use that, you know. And so this work, Ombre, which also has this, so ombre in French means shadow, so there is this idea also of something mysterious and maybe threatening, or that we don't know of, but
and all the you know, all the different myths and stories that are associated with hair, you know, as a power material, you might say, or as a frightening, again, you know, scale is a frightening thing, excess, you know, and you know, I would be thinking of excess of emotion, you know, excess of power is a very frightening thing. And I think it's very true that in the world, if you have an excess of hair, like hair at a certain degree is beautiful, acceptable and sexually attractive, but if it's excessive, it's quite frightening, you know, to people. And the first thing you do to dehumanize a person is take away their hair completely, like in the army or in the concentration camp, in the prison, in the Magdalen laundry. So they take the hair from the people so that their identity is completely wiped, you know. So it's a very strong material, you know, to work with in terms of, because everybody here has completely different hairstyle. And, you know, if they turned around, you would recognize that. The backs of their head are all completely different. And when I was asked to donate a self-portrait to the National Self-Portrait Collection, I did a portrait of the back of my head, you know, rather than the face, because I think the face is often a mask of the human, you know, and that the hair, the body, the pores, the skin, the orifices could be the real connection with the world, the external world, you know, the internal world. And the face is a way of masking all of that very often. Yes. And this was, just to let you know, was done when it's called Ombre because it was done when I just came back from living in France. So I lived in Paris for a year, in Ivry-sur-Seine, where I was on residence. And it was marvelous. I absolutely loved it. And I think I was really influenced by the great scale of the Gothic windows and stuff as well. When I did these works, yeah. So, and they just seemed to climb up the wall, you know, as I did them. So I worked with them at this level, you know, and then up, yeah. So that would be because I had a very tall studio, you know. So, like, yeah, the context of how you create work is very dependent on the space, you know, as well. Yeah.
How tall is it, the work?
I was doing feet at that time, so it's like 14 feet.
Okay.
Anybody know how much that is? A couple of meters, I don't know. I'm not good.
In the metric system.
Yeah. 14 feet. Yeah.
And yes, I think, I had another question, not related to those work yet, but also the question of scale also, I think, brings the question of space. So both the exhibition space, which I think you keep in mind quite strongly from what I've understood when you prepare a show, but also maybe the space of the paper itself. Yeah. And I think on your work on paper, and maybe you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong, but the blank areas seem just as important as the more dense or darker ones that we have. It's not necessarily visible on those ones, but still there is always a lot of space around the character, and I was wondering if that was how the artwork also unfolds in that space, or if that was...
Yeah, people often say to me, where is that space? Like, what is it? Where is she sitting, standing, you know? But to me, it's like a space of becoming, you know, so it's a space that creates itself by being made. Somebody once, it wasn't me, but I do that now, compared it to the space of the mind, you know, where things enter, things become into the reservoir of your mind, then they change, and then they come out of your mind, you know, in language, you know, or in activity. So it's like creating a space for art to evolve in, you know. So they create the space. And you'll often see, these are fairly big drawings too, about 150 by 102 or something, and centimeters. And I don't know what I was going to say. Yeah, if you look at them close, you'll see all the lines that were not used. You know, so I'm like drawing, 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 erasing, 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 and then the image emerges a little bit, almost like sculpture. You know, and you probably can tell by looking at the drawing that I do make sculpture also, because they have that feeling of being in space, in three dimensionals. So the shadow of the work, of the labor, of the creation of that work remains on the paper. I'm not hiding that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. What you're saying about the fact that it's a space for becoming, a site for transformation,
Yes.
and transformation is something that is everywhere in your work. I think
Yes.
not only in that blank space, but also in these creatures that like merge also different elements that we would see as being separate or that we
Yes.
don't necessarily associate. So to talk also about this work, I also wanted to talk about the notion of pressure, maybe the pressure that is exerted on the body.
Yes.
So, which is something that I feel is quite present in through your work. And so, as you mentioned, there is also the social and political context of in Ireland, the pressure of the church on women's body that you mentioned, so maybe you want to expand a bit on that notion in relation to body, the Irish context and activism, because you've been active also in the context of the Eighth Amendment.
Yes.
More recent.
Yes.
In 2018.
In more recent years, it's more like as I got older,
yeah.
you know, and began to see that something has had to be done, you know, because I was working through all of this, you know, in the imagery, you know, as an artist. But there's just one time in your life where you have to stand up and actually do something about it, you know. So as Ireland began to move into a more open space itself, you know, and the church fell because of its horrible abuse, you know, and treatment of incarcerated women and children. And then that belief kind of fell away, and people began to see there could be another way for us, you know. And then a lot of those movements were ground-up movements, not top-down movements, you know. So it's like the people decide, you know. So I became involved as an activist for change. So I would have been involved in the marriage equality referendum, you know, tangentially, and that would be same-sex marriage referendum. And then later than that came the referendum for reproductive rights. That is the right to abortion and to reproductive care, you know. Before that, you couldn't actually leave the country pregnant if you were going for an abortion. You would actually be arrested, you know, and that did happen, and that's what kind of changed everything. So I worked in a group, artists campaign to but you know, making banners and, you know, having processions and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I think I wanted to mention those ideas also. I took those work also because I think there is something about the load that these characters, like a sort of Sisyphus load that the character is. There are many other interpretations, obviously, but there is also maybe also the maybe some sort of violence in the diviner. That there are once again many ways to read this work.
Yeah.
There is also some other in that work that is earlier work. There is also something that is quite maybe also violent, such as this bite or the tie of the hair in pegged. And you talked about hair and how it was related to power. And if you own someone's hair, you also own their maybe power. You can constrain it, maybe. So I don't know if that's also what this work can be about.
These are very small, just to say they're very different scale. So these are pencil drawings, you know, quite small, little A4 size pencil drawings. And they have a different kind of feel, I think, more of a narrative kind of feel, you know, than the larger ones, because I can get down to little details, you know, when I'm doing the small work. So the one on the left there looks a bit like kind of Leda and the Swan kind of thing, meeting of. And and I mean the one on the right, that's my little table, you know, underneath there, you know. So that was from looking at something. But there's usually some kind of tension, you know, between the figures or between the elements, in the work for sure. Yeah, so that's what you're talking about, is it?
Yeah, exactly. That was this tension or pressure or constraint in some ways.
But that's kind of what makes the work.
Yeah.
You know, the tension and the pressure. Otherwise, it's just a nice drawing. You know?
It's just an illustration or something.
But
it's
often something that looks like it might be impossible as well. You know, something that's improbable, impossible, strange, and
unexpected. And totally. And also, I think that's also different work. And but that's
a big one and a small one. This is watercolor.
Yes,
and that's
this
the drawing.
Yeah.
So you can see the little figure, and you know they're funny too.
Yeah, they are funny too. No, of course. So that's why I keep on saying.
She's got her hands down her trousers there. You say, that are trousers, but it's not her trousers. It's a tree. You know, she's like
it is like roots, or I suppose. But also, just in relation to the notion of pressure or tension, I was thinking also it could be seen as like hindered legs or something. You know, hindered or constrained legs. Even though it can also signal that
roots or something like that.
Yeah, much more positive way to look
at it.
And just to carry on, and also with those more like on the notion maybe of a hybridity or like unexpected also you know, characters and figures. Just these ones also, I think also are surprising as well. So we have those body extension that could look either monstrous, but also you know, with those bloody tears or like those worm-like or intestine-like loops. But also, it's very full of life in some ways, because
I think it's
another
something
you know.
I think it's another kind of claiming of space. You know, it's like expanding into space in some very imaginative way. You know, so you expand out into space, almost like a plant, or you know, like a lake, or like a giant worm, or something like that. So, you know, it's about the imaginative possibilities, really, of the body and claiming of space. You know.
Yeah.
And this is from a group of drawings from 2016, called The Glorious Maids of the Charnel House. So the Charnel House is the house of death, as you probably know. You know. So that could be a good or a bad place. Yeah, depending.
Depending on, once again, how you see it, how you look at it. So of course, there is a lot of like liveliness also in those sort of like movement and expansion of the
and
body.
They don't look like they're having a bad time. Like, you know, the figures, they're quite calm often.
Yeah.
You know, when that one that you showed already, the diviner, she's putting her hand right into the other creature. Yeah. But nobody is, like, it's quite calm. There you go.
That one.
You know what I mean? Even the creature looks like he's having a nice time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
they look also
dreamy kind of.
Yeah, meditative maybe.
Sexual, whatever. So, you know, there's that in it as well.
Absolutely. And actually, to talk about those like the posture of the character. Sorry, I've been too far away.
Also kind of crouching figures.
Yes, we have many crouching or sort of like you know, like turning her back and exactly, and or closing the eyes a little bit. And I was also I think there is this interesting thing about how the bodies are both exposed, because very often there is also they're naked. But also concealed.
They're kind of naked, but not objectifiably naked.
No, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So in a way, that's why they are turned away, or you know, they're in their own world. You know, as well, and they're in that world. They're making that world. They're the queen of that world. You know, so they're not giving their body for the objectification of a viewer.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, totally. I think there is this this tension between exposure but also concealment or hiding, or like just also this sort of maybe agency of those figures to choose what they want to show, and it's it's very interesting, because it's very that's also the same here, also that we have where they turn their back, but it's called the bird. It's from a series called the Bird Mistress, like the mistress of the birds. You know, so you have giant birds, and you know, birds in mythology are the great augurs between this world and the other. You know, so a lot of the work I would do kind of somehow tries to join the worlds, the other worlds, the different worlds. You know. So the diviner as well, because there is this notion also, obviously, of telling. This one here on the right is called
bird mistress, the song. So this is like the song of her spine, you know? The spine is rising up to become like this great, powerful, interlocking kind of thing.
Yeah, and we have also that with the hair, and we'll see that later also, how the hair is also sort of a extension also of the body, as we also mentioned before. But I also, once again, with the notion of transformation that we've evoked before, I also wanted to mention a film that I cannot show here, but that I saw, that is The Music of Things.
Yes.
And I thought it was quite interesting because it showed a different way of you working with drawing as well. And
Animation,
yes. So because it's created from a series of scanned drawings, I believe. And I think what we can understand from that animated film about your drawing practice is it both shows how a body, like the mutative capacities of a body, because of the moving image, obviously. So that highlight that in the drawings, and it also shows how a narrative, I think, in your work emerge also from how movement and line meet rather than the opposite. It's not like you're gonna illustrate, a narrative in some ways. It seems to come from the drawing and from the movement of the line.
Try to follow the form that's emerging really on the paper for me. So I try to do that, And
also, I think it shows also because we can see how a drawing moves. We see also what has disappeared, and we see how erasure and erasing is also very important. And you mentioned it before in your process also of work. And in some of the work here, we see like the erasing process is very present, much more than in other work. So I guess the notion of erasure is linked to the notion of passing of time and of memory, and that's something that you've referred to earlier. So how do you see also how your practice taps into the workings of the mind and like through erasing, but also how you also work with that notion of memory?
Well, I think the mind is like a scatter. I read an awful lot. I read and film. Watch film, and like I have a very scattered interest. And I feel like I allow all of that into my work as well as what's actually happening in society, and politics as well. So I kind of allow that to work through me as well. I'm not blocking out that, either. And I think the mind receives things in a scatter kind of way, that you hear something or you read a story, and you half remember it, and that's kind of good enough for me. I'm not trying to make the perfect story, or to have a happy ending or a bad ending, or, I'm just interested in the process of making, And I think art is somewhere, it's a place, a very, I don't know if the word positive is the right place for it, but art is an action against negativity, nothingness, death, and annihilation. And it's the only thing, really, that works like that.
And it's interesting to talk about that in relation also to erasure. That is actually a way also to show how things move as well, and how you have also different layers, in making a work. That is a process, as you said, with different stage. And to carry on also with the notion of memory that I mentioned. I think you explore how memory is also intertwined with a collective reference. So memory is something that we think as individual, but in your work, it is not just individual. And as you for instance, you use, and we've seen some of them, like a lot of those knot-like shapes that both can refer to the tradition of the symbolism of the mind, for instance, that is very often represented with like knots. It also
fluid. There's like a fluid, that the mind is a fluid space, like an open, spongy space, fluid. And fluid space on the paper as well. So it's kind of an open space where anything could emerge.
Yeah. But it also, like, those knots are also referring probably maybe to the tradition of Celtic knots
Yes,
in some ways.
Yeah. And actually, recently, I had, because of project I was doing, I was looking back in my sewing textile work, looking back at early Christian manuscripts, from that we have in the libraries in Dublin, and that whole thing of interlocking and kind of endless overlapping, and turning back on yourselves, I think is a marvelous kind of emblem for the kind of rebranching that can happen in your mind when one thing leads to another, so. Yeah, that's a good reference.
Yeah, for parallel also.
Parallel.
With those, and also even I think with those works. So here, for instance, we have this work where we see obviously the, like how the mind is physically made of knots, and also how thoughts are,
like a planet.
Like a planet. And it's also going out of the body, and we have
now these are wood block prints here. They're not
these
drawings.
Are different, but what I wanted, that's why I've shown them now, is also because you also have like wood nuts as well, like that are present. The wood is made of nuts as well itself.
Yes.
So I think another way to look at nuts, also even in your work, is also how also you also create a link between human figures and also wood or like non-human material.
It was a kind of an effort on my part to collaborate with the material in a way, So I picked the cheapest wood, you could possibly, I forget what the name is now, it was like really cheap, and I got into these positions myself, just like I explained to you, then made silhouettes from them, and use the silhouette to cut the wood into that shape, and then print, just print it. That's made by press as well, so you're pressing the material to come up with the image, you see. But then when the image emerged, it had all these knots, and what the printer said were mistakes, on it. But of course the mistake is exactly where I'd like to position myself. So then you have all these knots, and they look like giant orifices, of the body, like eyes, ears, vagina, anus, mouth, and also, of course, they remind me of those medieval, the medieval monsters that you see at the margins of the world. The early maps. So I was looking at maps a lot too. Right over there, here be dragons. Here be the people we do not want. Here be the other.
The
here
snakes.
Be the other. Yeah. The monsters. And so. I really enjoyed making those woodblock prints.
Yeah, and
they're large too, fairly large.
They're large, yes. So yes, so we can carry on the fact that there is something about with this knot motif and all the notion that we evoked earlier about with the thicket, the notion of thicket. There is this notion of like intricacy, or even something a labyrinth, in some ways, and and that converged also with the motif of the hair that we mentioned also before. But I wanted to show those two works.
Yes,
and I think they're very interesting also by their titles. So so we have Mary Magdalene listening to her hair, and I think she's listening to something very obscure and thick and intricate. And the title is surprising because we don't associate hair as as something that would have sound, like hair is, we consider it to be silent in some ways.
Yes.
So that's why it's a first surprise, and also hair has this particular situation where it's both our body, ourself, but it's also a bit external to us, because if we cut it, we don't feel pain or anything. So there is this interesting idea where she's listening to something silent. She's also listening to herself, but also herself as someone else, because the hair is also not really us,
Yeah.
So maybe that's something we can expand on. And the title of the second one is Self. So once again, we have this relationship between, like the self would be also that thing that goes outside of us and that is not really us.
I was asked to do a self-portrait for the National Gallery, in Dublin. So I started working on my own image, and actually my face was in there originally. Yeah, but just bit by bit, nothing is left except the hand. You see it there trying to peep out? See the hand? Yeah, so the face is absolutely gone, and this great whirl of interlocking braids, you know, or intestines, you know, and it could be so the inner and the outer body are married, really, you know, in that image. So it's like a self of the body, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I tried to do a face, but didn't. Yeah, yeah.
There was the self.
Yeah.
So also, I think we've seen that you work. You know, we have motifs that resurface across different bodies of work through, you know, through time reappearing over the years, as we could see, like, you know, from the selection of work, and you know, we have the hair, the nuts, the roots with the dryads, for instance. You have the figure of Magdalene. We also have specific gestures and postures, have we seen, you know, as we've seen. And so I think you work with, like, both with those motifs that come back, but you also work in series. So we have different ways of sort of not classifying, but putting together the work in some ways in your
I always work in series, so I would never work really in just one work after another. They seem to all speak in a chorus, you know, if I could align it with music in a way, or with song, you know, rather than one work contain everything. It's like multiple, you know, multiple voice on a theme. So yeah, I work in series. Yeah.
And I think in some ways also the fact that we have, like, through different series, the fact that we have these recurring elements builds a visual language, which is what I mentioned in the introduction, with some elements that would function as words that would recur in some ways, like in a language, you know, that would reappear in different spaces, different times, different contexts, and meaning that would shift from a series to another one, you know, rather than having a fixed meaning, you know, for each, you know, motif or pattern. So I was wondering what you know, if you think in terms of repetition sometimes, and what's happening with repetition, or repetition and change, obviously, but or beyond repetition. Is that something that you have in mind?
Well, repetition leads to something, you know, like repetition in drawing, you know, for instance, can lead to something, you know, so like the repetition making, you know, of hair can lead to something absolutely massive, you know, as well. So something really, really small, you know. So I'm very interested in minuscule and the kind of cosmic, you know, from that scale, like to kind of that scale, and everything, you know, in between. The medium kind of scale isn't really for me, you know. It's not where change really happens, you know.
And I think finally, I think we can also mention
questions from.
Oh yes, we still have 10 minutes, so I'll just ask a last question, and maybe then if people want to ask a few questions, there will be time. I just wanted to finish with I think the notion of hybridity, which we've mentioned through the talk, but I haven't focused totally on it, and I just wanted to ask you how you see also this connection between, you know, the physical body and the environment. You mentioned first also, you know, how also where you come from, there is this connection also with the natural elements that is very intricate and much more present and lively, maybe, than what we see, you know, otherwise. But yes, you know, how you use also those, you know, with the dryads that we've seen before, like this one, but also. Those ones. We see that those roots, so I talked about constrained legs, but that's one way to look at it, but also as roots, they also work as interface, you know, between the human body and its environment. And the blank space also let us imagine whatever environment it could be. And I was wondering how you see this articulation.
Well, hybridity, you know, the half human, half, like we see it in all of our cultures, you know, all the different mermaids and centaurs and all the creatures that are half human. And I think it's a kind of an expression of human longing, you know, to understand animal nature, you know, our animal nature, and to get back to some kind of, you know, to be animal, you know. So I think that's in every culture's kind of expression, you know, longing for that understanding and that kind of natural feeling of being in the world and happy being in the world. Like the human is the one who's never happy in the world and always seeking and judging, you know, everything. Whereas the animal lives in the world as an animal, you know, and they never make a wrong. Like an animal cannot make an ugly mark, for instance, you know. But an artist, you know, is for always judging everything that the marks that they make, you know. So I think it's a kind of longing for animal, you know, for the animal nature, but it's also probably reflective of to try and kind of bring together difference, you know, things that are different, and to make them work, you know, with each other rather than separate, you know, rather than keeping them separate. Yeah, so there's a longing for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we can see how you also create those. I said interface, but like those sort of like links. You know, those legs work as links between different realms, the human realms and another one. Thank you so much. I think maybe if people have a few questions, we still have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I work better with questions.
So.
Like here. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Your work is amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
I literally had a really quick question, which was, how did you make the drawing that was, I forgot what it was called, the one that's like all hair?
Ombre.
Yeah.
Yes.
This one.
Yes.
How did you make it?
You mean physically? How?
Yeah. Or
Well, I was standing. You know, like, oh, it's charcoal.
It's charcoal.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I was trying to. It looks like real hair.
No.
It
Well,
looks
that's
like real hair.
Yeah, it has the haptic quality, so that you don't know if it's touchable or not. And a lot of the works kind of have a kind of haptic. We didn't show any sculptural works, you know, but I've often made sculpture works with thorns or with things that look like, you know, that you could touch them or that you can feel them without touching, in a way. So it's all about that kind of haptic experience. No, that's just charcoal, yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I think like you've somehow got the tone, and it looks like good, like shiny hair as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
you.
Je vais adresser ma question en français parce que je comprends bien anglais, mais j'ai un petit peu mal pour m'exprimer. Et c'est par rapport à l'effacement. Donc, et je trouve que c'est un acte de résistance également, de montrer quelque chose que d'habitude dans l'art, on n'a pas envie de montrer, les erreurs qu'on fait, et qu'on a envie vraiment de montrer un petit peu la cuisine de l'artiste. Et comment, à quel moment dans votre carrière c'est arrivé ce moment de commencer à intégrer dans votre art l'effacement, donc délibérément, de montrer que c'est un processus et qu'on veut montrer aussi les erreurs, finalement. Et à quel moment vous avez décidé d'intégrer ça dans votre œuvre comme une sorte de technique également et thématique également, j'imagine, non? C'est aussi une thématique d'assumer ça, quoi, comme...
So you
et
mean...
acte, courage, hein, de
So
courage de...
Désolé,
c'est bon,
so
c'est
if
ça.
I understand the question, maybe you can translate. Is it at what time in my career did I...
integrate erasure and as
very early on.
As something that is also an act of resistance that is also connected to mistakes we make in work, and how and when did you also use it and decided to show it in your work?
Très tôt, very early on in my life, you know, when I discovered that drawing was considered a secondary practice. When I went to it was considered less than painting, the great painting, you know, or sculpture. And that is really why I think I use drawing, you know, as a kind of method of, you know, going against that whole notion that drawing can be just as powerful, if not more, you know, in terms than painting. So that's why I was attracted to drawing as a material to begin with, yes. And the erasure that you asked me about was always, you know, part of that, even before I understood what that meant, you know. Thank you.
Je voulais m'assurer, c'était vraiment un acte d'assumer de résistance un petit peu de la perfection de l'art qui est un petit peu demandée dans l'art, la perfection.
Exactement.
Et donc voilà, vous avez vraiment délibérément décidé d'intégrer ça comme résistance pour... Ok, merci.
Et ça réfléchit la position de la féminine en l'histoire d'art aussi. Oui. Oui.
So you didn't show any photographs of sculptures.
No.
How do the sculptures relate to the drawings? Are the sculptures single objects? Do you make environments?
Yes.
How do you approach sculpture, and do the drawings relate to the sculptures in any way?
Well, I suppose I collect materials, you know, and I just collect them almost by instinct, you know. So I'd be collecting, if I saw, for instance, when I was walking through the market, I saw all of these hearts for sale, you know, and think, so I'd buy a bag of hearts and put them in the deep freeze until it emerges to me that I can use them for something, you know. So so I'm always looking, you know, always looking for the material that speaks to me, you know, but it mightn't speak straight away, you know. So I have buckets of this and things of that and bags of snails, and you know. So your question then is about how does that relate to drawing? Is it so? I wouldn't do a drawing of a sculpture, so that's just not connecting, you know. So I would never do a drawing of a sculpture, I don't think, anyway, although they may look sculptural, I suppose.
And would the sculpture be a single object, or would it be an environment where you'd make a room?
Yeah, I've done both now.
Sculpture?
I have done both now. Large installation, you know, where everything relates, or a single object as well. But I'd be more comfortable with the you know, with the whole relation of a large space rather than the single object. Yeah.
Right, and within that sculpture environment, there could be drawings within the sculpture environment.
Yeah.
And how does photography fit in? Does the photography
well,
that you
it
do
only fitted in once, and that was in a particular time. I think I was like 45 or something, and it was like a portal in your life. You know, when you're just about to enter a new age and you're leaving the old age. You know, and I wanted to make images of myself. And I knew that to draw oneself is an expressive thing to do. So you're expressing something about yourself. And I wanted to make an image, you know, of the image of self. So I employed a photographer called Kate Horgan to take the photographs that I had planned. But it kind of ended up that none of the photographs really showed my face. You know what I mean? So it was like covering my face, you know.
Right, with bees, or I remember one where there was a necklace of tongues.
Tongues, yeah.
That
Well,
you mentioned earlier.
Well, you could see my face then, but the tongues were so physical that you look at the tongues. Right. Yeah, so it was like, yeah. But yeah, photography just once in that particular time. So a material is chosen, you know, it comes to me when the time is right. Thank you.
So, Alice, you talk wonderfully confidently about art being a positive element, and you've also talked about erasure. How you also involve this incredible sort of Dionysian destruction in your work. How do you explain?
Well, that's a positive. I would consider that a positive as well. You know, destruction, rage, you know, like that is all part of positivity as far as I'm concerned. You know?
So would I.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you.
It left me nearly in tears. I wanted to ask you more about your relationship with your farming upbringing.
With my upbringing?
Yeah.
Yes.
How? So it was really great to hear about the ancestral relationship with the landscape and so on. I would like to ask you, how did that evolve throughout your life? And also because I guess that background was so entangled with the culture that was quite repressive and so on. How has that evolved throughout your life?
Well, I'd have to say,
yeah,
you know, that I ran away from it. You know, when you're young, all you want to do is get away from where you come from. So down the road I went, you know, and out of there. But it's inside me, you know. I mean, I came to realize that then as I began to make art, you know, because you access something inside you. And then I knew my interior landscape was where I came from, you know. And the first landscape that I opened my eyes upon as a child, that's the landscape that stayed, you know, that stayed within. And the first story I heard, you know, from my mother, that's the story, you know, that stayed. So I just came to understand that through making art, actually, you know. But it didn't come early, you know. You know, so in my 20s, like in my late 20s, when I began to think in that way and not to despise my own culture, you know, which is what colonial countries regularly do, turn on their own culture, to despise it, like we rejected our own language because it wasn't good enough, you know. But now we're back there with it.
Do we have more questions, or I think it's no, we can finish.
Thank you so much, Estelle.
Thank you so much, Alice. It was wonderful to have you this morning, and thank you to everyone for coming and for your questions. Thanks also, Karine, for organizing everything. And I don't know if you want to say a last word or no.
Thank you very much. And if you want to follow this talk, it will be online on the website. So if you missed something, or for the one who were as well on Instagram and so on, you can continue on our website in a few hours. Thank you very much, Alice.
Thank you for
inviting me. Estelle.